The Kuki people, an ethnic group primarily inhabiting the hill regions of northeast India, parts of Myanmar and Bangladesh, have a rich and complex history tied to their homeland, often referred to as the Kuki Hills or Zalengam, land of freedom in Kuki tradition. The term Kuki Independence Hills likely refers to the hilly territories where the Kuki tribes have historically resided, particularly in Manipur, Mizoram, Assam, and adjacent areas, which have been central to their cultural, political, and social identity. This essay explores the history of the Kuki Hills across three distinct periods: before the British era during British colonial rule, and after Indian independence, focusing on their socio-political organization, resistance to external control, and struggles for autonomy. Before the British era, a tapestry of autonomy and tribal governance. The pre-British era for the Kuki people was characterized by a decentralized tribal society governed by chieftains, with a strong sense of autonomy and cultural cohesion. The Kuki tribes, part of the larger Zo or Kuki-Chin linguistic and ethnic group, inhabited the rugged hills stretching across present-day Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, Assam, and parts of Myanmar and Bangladesh. Their settlements were primarily in the Mizo, formerly Lushai Hills, and the Chittagong Hill tracts, with significant populations in the hills surrounding the Imphal Valley in Manipur. Socio-political organization. Kuki society was organized around independent villages, each led by a chief, Hausa or Hausa, whose authority was both hereditary and consensual, rooted in customary laws and traditions. The chief managed village affairs, resolved disputes, and led during conflicts, often with the support of a council of elders. Villages were self-sufficient, relying on shifting cultivation, chum, for agriculture, supplemented by hunting and gathering. This system allowed the Kukis to maintain a high degree of independence as the rugged terrain of the hills discouraged centralized control by external powers. The Kuki tribes were not a monolithic entity, but comprised various clans and subtribes, such as Thadu, Hamar, Pait, Vaifei, and Zu, each with distinct dialects and customs. Despite this diversity, they shared a common cultural ethos, including oral traditions, folklore, and rituals that reinforced their connection to the land. Myths, such as the belief that their ancestors emerged from a cave, Kul, underscored their deep-rooted ties to the hills. These oral narratives, passed down through generations, celebrated warrior ethos and resistance against external domination, shaping Kuki identity. Relations with neighbors. Before British intervention, the Kuki tribes interacted with neighboring groups, including the Métis of the Imphal Valley and the Nagas in the northern hills of Manipur. Relations were often cooperative but could turn hostile due to competition over resources or territorial disputes. The Métis kings, who ruled the Manipur Valley, occasionally sought tribute from hill tribes, but rarely exerted direct control over the Kuki hills due to their inaccessibility. The Kukis, known for their martial prowess, conducted raids on lowland areas, including the Chittagong Plains and Tripura, to assert their dominance or secure resources. For instance, historical records mention Kuki raids on Bengali settlements in the Chittagong Hill tracts as early as the 12th century, indicating their long-standing presence and influence in the region. The Tibetan Buddhist writer Taranatha, 1575 to 1634, described the Kuki country as encompassing much of the eastern hill range, suggesting that their territory was recognized even in distant chronicles. Similarly, the term Kuki appears in the records of Tripura's kings from the reign of Danyamanikya, 1490 to 1515, indicating their historical significance in the region. These accounts highlight the Kukis' autonomy and their ability to maintain a distinct identity despite interactions with neighboring powers. Cultural and economic life. The Kukis economy was agrarian, centered on jum cultivation, which involved clearing forest patches for temporary farming before moving to new areas. This practice suited the hilly terrain but required mobility, contributing to their nomadic tendencies. They grew rice, millet, and vegetables, and supplemented their diet with game from the forests. Bamboo, abundant in the hills, was used for housing, tools, and handicrafts, reflecting their resourcefulness. Culturally, the Kukis were animists, worshipping nature spirits and ancestors, with rituals led by priests, tiempu. Their folklore, rich with tales of heroes and gods, was transmitted orally as they lacked a written script. Festivals, such as Shavang Kut, celebrated harvests and reinforced community bonds through music, dance, and feasting. These cultural practices fostered a strong sense of identity, which would later fuel resistance against external impositions. During the British era, resistance and colonial encroachment. The British colonial period, 1826 to 1947, marked a significant turning point for the Kuki Hills, as British expansion into northeast India disrupted the tribe's autonomy. The Treaty of Yandabo, 1826, which ended the First Anglo-Burmese War, ceded Assam, Manipur, and the hill areas to the British, bringing the Kuki Hills under colonial influence. The British sought to control the region for strategic and economic reasons, but their policies clashed with Kuki traditions, sparking resistance. Early encounters and raids. Kuki resistance to British encroachment began in the 18th century, with raids on British subjects in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. These attacks intensified after 1826, as the British imposed taxes and attempted to regulate tribal practices. Periodic Kuki raids occurred in 1845, 1847 to 48, 1849, 1850, and 1851, targeting British settlements and their allies. The most notable pre-1917 incident was the Great Kuki Invasion of Tipperah in the 1860s, where Kuki warriors burned 15 villages and killed around 185 British subjects, demonstrating their capacity for organized resistance. The British viewed the Kukis as savage and ungovernable, a colonial stereotype that justified punitive expeditions. To counter Kuki raids, the British established the Assam Rifles, a paramilitary force, and conducted retaliatory incursions into tribal territory. However, the hills' rugged terrain limited British control, and the Kukis continued to assert their autonomy. The Anglo-Manipur War and administrative changes. The Anglo-Manipur War of 1891, which brought Manipur under direct British administration, further altered the dynamics of the Kuki Hills. The British implemented the Inner Line policy, separating the Manipur Valley, under colonial governance, from the hills, which were left under nominal British control through the president of the Manipur State Durbar. This arrangement allowed the Kukis to retain some autonomy, but introduced new pressures, such as taxes on hill houses and restrictions on jam cultivation. Missionary activity also intensified during this period. William Pettigrew, an American Baptist missionary, arrived in Manipur in 1894, followed by Watkins Robert, who established the Indo-Burma Thadu Kuki Pioneer Mission in 1913, later renamed the Northeast India General Mission in 1924. Missionaries introduced English education and Christianity, which some Kukis adopted, leading to social changes. However, conversion efforts and British policies such as forced labor, pot hang, were deeply resented, as they undermined traditional practices and authority. The Anglo-Kuki War, 1917 to 1919. The most significant Kuki resistance during the British era was the Anglo-Kuki War, 1917 to 1919, also known as the Kuki Rebellion, or Zugal in the Kuki language. This uprising was triggered by British attempts to recruit Kuki men into labor corps for World War I, but it reflected broader grievances against colonial policies, including taxation, forced labor, and interference with traditional practices. The war began in 1917 when Kuki chiefs, led by figures like Chenja Pao and Pache, refused to comply with recruitment demands. The rebellion spread across 6,000 square miles from the Naga Hills to the Chin Hills, involving coordinated attacks on British outposts. Despite lacking modern weaponry, the Kukis used guerrilla tactics, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain to challenge the British for 2 years. The British responded with overwhelming force, deploying the Assam Rifles and Burma Military Police. They burned 126 Kuki villages, destroyed food stocks, and killed or maimed many, crushing the rebellion by 1919. The war had profound consequences. The British imposed penal labor for 5 years, further impoverishing the region, and tightened administrative control. However, the rebellion, described by scholars as a war of independence, galvanized Kuki nationalism and reinforced their resolve to protect their autonomy. The Dobashi Lingjang Kuki is credited with preventing Kukis in the Naga Hills from joining the rebellion, highlighting internal divisions within the community. World War II and shifting allegiances. During World War II, the Kukis saw an opportunity to regain independence by aligning with the Imperial Japanese Army and the Indian National Army, INA, led by Subhas Chandra Bose. Motivated by anti-colonial sentiment, many Kukis served as guides and soldiers for the INA, hoping to overthrow British rule. However, the Allied victory in 1945 dashed these hopes, and the Kukis faced repercussions for their involvement, with some arrested and imprisoned. After the British era, struggles for autonomy, and ethnic conflicts. The post-independence period, 1947 to present, has been marked by the Kukis' struggle for self-determination within the Indian Union, complicated by ethnic tensions, insurgency, and demands for a separate homeland. The incorporation of Manipur into India in 1949, following the controversial merger agreement signed by the Maharaja, was met with resentment among the Kukis, who sought greater autonomy. Integration into India and ethnic tensions. After independence, the Kuki Hills were integrated into the state of Manipur, which became a full-fledged state in 1972. The Kukis, constituting about 16% of Manipur's population, primarily inhabit the southern hill districts, such as Churachandpur and Kangpokpi. However, their aspirations for autonomy clashed with the Meitei-dominated state government and the Nagas, who sought integration with a greater Nagaland. You are listening Voice of the Voiceless from Zalengam Media. The Kuki-Naga conflict, which intensified in the 1950s and peaked during 1992 to 1998, resulted in over 1,000 deaths and the displacement of 50,000 to 100,000 people. The Nagas, aiming to homogenize the northern hills, drove Kukis out of areas like Ukhrul and Tamenglong, while the Kukis resisted, claiming ancestral rights to the land. These clashes were fueled by overlapping territorial claims and competition for political power, with both groups forming militant organizations. The Kuki Autonomy Movement. The demand for a separate Kuki homeland, often termed Kuki land, or a state within India under the Sixth Schedule, has been a central feature of Kuki politics since independence. The Kuki National Organization, KNO, and United People's Front, UPF, formed in the 1980s, have led an armed insurgency to press for autonomy. These groups signed a suspension of operations, SOO agreement with the Indian government in 2008, initiating political dialogue, but progress has been slow, with the SOO extended annually without a resolution. You are listening Voice of the Voiceless from Zalengam Media. The Kuki autonomy movement is rooted in historical grievances, including the loss of autonomy under British rule and marginalization within Manipur. Scholar Saikogin Hao-kip describes it as a quest for self-rule within the Indian constitution, emphasizing protections for Kuki culture and land rights. However, the Meitei majority, which controls 40 of Manipur's 60 assembly seats, opposes these demands, fearing they would undermine the state's territorial integrity. Recent developments and challenges. Since the 1990s, the Kukis have made significant socio-economic progress, aided by education and reservations, with many occupying senior positions in Manipur's government. However, this has led to accusations of historical revisionism, with some claiming the Kukis exaggerate their pre-British presence in Manipur to assert indigeneity. Historical records, such as those from the reign of Maharaja Narsingh, 1844 to 1850, suggest significant Kuki migration to Manipur after the Treaty of Yandabo, a point contested by Kuki scholars who emphasize earlier settlements. Ethnic violence in Manipur, particularly since 2023, has exacerbated tensions. Clashes between Kukis and Meiteis, sparked by disputes over land and political representation, have displaced thousands and highlighted the unresolved nature of Kuki demands. The Kuki community's commemoration of the Anglo-Kuki War as a war of independence has also faced opposition from Meitei and Naga groups who view it as a rebellion, leading to controversies over monuments and historical narratives. You are listening Voice of the Voiceless from Zalengam Media. Conclusion. The history of the Kuki Independence Hills reflects a resilient struggle for autonomy across centuries. Before the British era, the Kukis thrived as an independent tribal society, governed by chieftains and sustained by jam cultivation and cultural traditions. British colonialism disrupted this autonomy, sparking resistance, most notably the Anglo-Kuki War, which cemented Kuki nationalism. Post-independence, the Kukis have navigated complex ethnic and political landscapes, seeking self-determination amidst conflicts with neighboring communities and state authorities. Today, the Kuki Hills remain a contested space where historical grievances, cultural pride, and aspirations for autonomy continue to shape the community's trajectory. The Kukis' story is one of endurance, adaptation, and an unyielding connection to their land of freedom. You are listening Voice of the Voiceless from Zalengam Media. Please subscribe Zalengam Media.